I just wanted to start with welcoming everyone virtually to the Firehouse Art Center. My name is Elaine Waterman, and I am the executive director here. The Firehouse is a nonprofit art center in the heart of downtown Longmont on 4th and Kaufman, providing life-enhancing art experiences through art exhibitions, art education, and cultural events. Our artist talks are casual chats with artists, curators, members of the creative community, and creative entrepreneurs with a focus on how to build community within the arts. Firehouse Artist Talks give the community a chance to ask questions and get to a deeper level with the art on our walls. As I said, we are taping this talk, and you can find it on our YouTube channel along with our past artist talks and presentations. I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, the Longmont Downtown Development Authority, Longmont Creative District, Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Longmont Community Foundation, the Community Foundation of Boulder, and the Boulder County Arts Alliance. We couldn't connect our community to creative and life-changing art experiences without your help. If you would like to donate to support our programming and exhibits, please visit our website at firehouseart.org. And lastly, in the spirit of healing, the Firehouse acknowledges and honors the Arapaho tribe, the original people of the land upon which the Firehouse sits. We also wish to acknowledge all other Indigenous tribes and nations who call Colorado home. It is because of their hardships and sacrifices that we are able to be here sharing this art with you today. The Firehouse believes that we can only grow when we have a better appreciation for the history, legacy, and contributions that the tribes have made, not just to this region, but to the nation. I am excited to welcome the two artists of myth and memory, Lynden Cline and Jeff Leake. Welcome, guys. It's so great to have you here virtually.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background on Lynden. After a number of years working as an advertising executive, Lynden redirected her career to the fine and applied arts in 1997, where she began to focus her study of sculpture, ceramics, and furniture design at the Corcoran School of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Maryland Institute College of Art and Design. Her sculptures have been shown in various exhibitions at venues in the Washington, D.C. area, New York City, Massachusetts, and other states in the Northeast. Jeff Leake currently lives in Portland, Oregon, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. He holds a BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and an MFA from UC Davis. He currently works with neuroscience faculty at Portland State University to teach art and neuroscience. So just to start, I wanted to give you guys a shot of what the gallery looks like right now. So on the screen, you are looking at the gallery from the front of the space. And I wanted to start our conversation with you, Jeff. Your paintings grace the walls in our main gallery, and each painting is an amorphous and organic shape, which you guys can see there. So that's obviously like a very unique thing. Most of the time when you think of paintings, you kind of think of them on a canvas, which has four sides. But has painting always been your medium, and have you always created your own panel shapes? And lastly, how do these shifting shapes relate to the storytelling in your work?
Right. So I have actually been painting for quite a while. Certainly I learned that through drawing, and I do many other things as well. But I've always been kind of drawn to painting in part because it's really a fluid and changeable medium. And one thing you might not know from looking at these pieces, but um, uh, uh, they change quite a bit throughout the making of them. Like I'll start with one thing and then I'll respond to that. And then through that process, I'll often go back and change things that I've previously done, often to the extent that you really wouldn't recognize what uh, uh, um, that started from. So I'm always interested in that kind of changeability and the way that or kind of how that allows me to sort of create kind of a world in those spaces for myself. In terms of the shapes of these panels, the interesting thing with that, and this is probably something you wouldn't know if I didn't tell you, but they actually there's sort of a progression that makes sense to me in how those kind of came about. But I actually they started as sort of windows into space, and in fact, I was doing these large interior paintings and there'd be these little window shapes in the back that would have all the action going on in them. And so there would be all this stuff sort of crammed into those little spaces. And then eventually those spaces started getting bigger and more prominent. And then at a point, I kind of did away with the interiors, and I just had the window shapes. And then at a point after that, I started cutting out those shapes. And one of the things I found when I started to cut the shapes is that the shapes themselves then would start to suggest maybe what would go inside the piece to me. So I began sort of starting with those shapes, and they became more and more kind of organic. Um, and so now, to me, they're really kind of it's not just that it creates a kind of window into that world that I'm making, but also it's kind of like seeing shapes in clouds or something. Like it suggests to me like what might happen in that space. So that's kind of where those things came, and it's kind of a weird evolution, but um, it's interesting to me to kind of look at where it actually came from and how I came up with that. And it's a meandering sort of path.
Very cool. And then, so you're saying that the shapes kind of lead to the
hmm
subject matter.
Yeah, yeah. I almost always start with the shapes, and um, yeah, and there was like when I started cutting these out, they were kind of elaborate shapes, but they were usually pretty symmetrical and they're very ornamental. And but then I found that the more organic they became, the freer I was to sort of imagine what might happen in that space.
Cool. So your subject matter, and I'm kind of like flipping through some of the pieces, and then I'm actually going to pull another one
Mhm.
up. But you seem to be referencing mythology and archetypes that exist throughout history, from like Medusa to Kronos. So let me pull up
You should.
this guy.
Thanks, babe.
So, but you also reference
Mhm.
like cowboys and the moon landing.
Mhm.
Are your paintings interpreting old myths or are you creating your own symbolism?
Um, so the images themselves, they're really I'll usually start with old with stories and kind of archetypes. Um, but uh, like one of the things I'm really interested in. So I look at a lot of these kind of archetypes and sort of ways of behaving, and then I'm looking at stories that might kind of underlie those that kind of behavior. So I like the connection between these kind of American archetypes, this that sort of way of behaving, and these older mythologies. So and I'm really kind of interested in you know what those stories actually tell us, but also how they kind of might resonate with us today. Um, and the other thing that I try to do with these things is that I'm presenting stories and things that are sort of vaguely familiar, maybe to people, but in a way that is kind of dislocated from how you might normally see them or experience them, or in conjunction with things that you didn't that you wouldn't normally associate them with. And I'm really kind of interested in the kind of dialogue that creates, that that there might be a potential to see like uh, the things that the outcomes of these stories, the types of behaviors that these archetypes sort of tell us that we should be engaging in a different way that suggests maybe different possibilities, like it could have a different outcome, or there could be multiple interpretations of this thing that you have never really considered. And so that's part of my interest is not just, and I think that's part of why these aren't really my own um, uh, symbols in a way, because I'm much more interested in the dialogue with other people when they look at these things. Like other people's stories about these are probably, or at least to me, are probably more interesting than my own.
Mhm. I definitely, having like spending a lot of time in the gallery and spending a lot of time with the artwork that's on the walls, every time I look at one of your paintings, I notice
Mhm.
something different, like
Yeah.
something small that I didn't see. And I'm like, how did I not see that before? So, specifically the piece that is on the screen right now, I was
Mhm.
talking to somebody and we noticed the gentleman to the far right that's like scratching the S in the
Yep.
tree.
Yeah.
And then just the different
And then you
kind of,
can't unsee it.
yes,
Yep.
correct,
Yeah. Yeah.
Just,
correct.
yep.
I've never
Um,
saw him before right now.
Uh,
Huh.
So there's just all of these different styles from like American idealism, like the Western frontier, surrealism, Bosch, and
Yeah.
just all of these things kind of coming together. And what
mhm.
it kind of seems to me is like when you're in a dream and you're like thinking that it's real, and then
Yeah.
something happens, and then you're like, oh wait, I don't think this is real anymore. But that's kind of
Yeah. I like
uh,
that. That's
yeah. So, one last question for you, and then we're gonna bring Lyndon into the
mhm.
conversation. Do you have like a set list of characters, specifically looking at this, or when you are painting, do the characters kind of evolve?
So the characters definitely evolve, and in fact, like one of the things that I never have a sort of set outcome for these pieces. I'll start with one idea or one sort of core kind of thing, and then I'll work from there. But I think I'm probably as surprised as anybody as to how they turn out. And part of that's part of the interest to me is that it's like writing a story. Like I don't know the outcome either. Um, and so I think that kind of uh, um, allows me well, I have a starting point. It allows me to really kind of depart from that in a way that I think suggests maybe more possibilities for the people when they look at these things than just that
Mhm.
this is about one particular thing. Like it could be about a multiplicity of things, when you look at it. So, and that's part of what I really like. And in fact, it's one of the things that I like about art in general is that it doesn't necessarily have a fixed meaning. So,
Mhm. Cool. Well, thank you. So Lyndon, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your process. I know this is kind of different from Jeff, but your work mainly comes from your own personal experiences. Are your works telling your story, or are they a conversation between you and the people in your past?
Oh gosh. When Jeff was talking, I was struck by some of the similarities a little bit in our approach. I think they're both kind of surreal. And I'm gonna not answer I'm gonna be like a politician and come back to your question in
Totally
one
cool.
second. But a quote the Washington Post said about my work was a surreal combination of something like this, a surreal combination of Alice in Wonderland and Franz Kafka. So I was thinking as he was talking that they do some of the similar things that his work does, in terms of, I think of them as characters almost. And I try to, when the ones I feel have been successful, which I don't show the ones where I don't feel like they're a success from my standpoint, they are fully developed characters outside of myself. So I don't know if that answers your question at all. There's a piece on my website that's not in your show because it was I already had it obligated to something else, another show, but where the chairs in the piece actually indicate people. So this is not, the pieces in your show are not necessarily that. If you could go back to my father's chair, you had it up, I think, a
Hmm.
second ago. So that is actually um, the chair, and it's empty, indicates, it's very difficult to see right here, but they change for me, like what Jeff was saying, like it's interesting to see the outcome. You're never quite sure where you're going. And when I first made this piece, I made it, my work is narrative about family, and I made it about my biological father, who I had not met. And I realized about a year later, so it's titled My Father's Chair, Father apostrophe S, for that father. Um, and I have a kind of a colorful past. I was in foster care for a while before I ended up with that family. But I realized a year later that it's not about it can't be entirely about my biological father, because the word father really indicates the person I grew up with, by definition. So I retitled it Fathers apostrophe for both of them. But I was interested to see where that would go. And sometimes I walk by and see something quite different than what I put in it. And I think Jeff might be a tad more interested in other people's interpretation of his work. I am interested. At first, I wasn't at all because I thought people were not getting it. But then they came to it with something different that I now do pay close attention to. Their interpretations. But I think there is always there's to me, and I'm quite opinionated about this, but I believe there should be a dialogue
Hmm.
between the viewer. And if the piece gives something back to that viewer, they walk up, like you were saying with Jeff's piece, with pieces, with seeing a character you hadn't even seen before, that coming to it and leaving with a different impression than when you first walked up is kind of magical.
Hmm. Um, and then looking at your pieces and having spoken to you, I know that you have a background in furniture design. So, as you can see, let me just pull a couple more in here. Specifically, this one,
Oh, which one are you going to show?
the wheelchair.
Okay, well, that should
So,
not be angled quite like that. The shadow's
no,
straight, but the
let's do it from this angle.
okay.
Um,
Well, I can start talking about it while you do that. So, the visual inspiration, I like to talk about this rather than talk about the actual narrative story. Sometimes I feel safer discussing the visual inspiration, but I think, Elaine, I don't know if you're referencing the visual inspiration to this piece. Do you want me to tell that tale?
Well, yes, I do, because that actually
Okay.
is something
I
that
think
is
it's
really
pretty
important.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's totally going to lead to another question. So yes, please.
Oh, okay, good. So you don't want me to leave it out.
No, no.
So I was looking through like a home design magazine and I saw this beautiful living room, and pulled up to the coffee table was this very ordinary looking dining room chair with arms. And it was a very ordinary chair. But when you looked at it, you could see it had very small wheels on the bottom, much like my piece. And it's really colloquially called the wheelchair. It's called The End of the Beginning of the End is the actual title for the piece. But the small wheels at the bottom on this chair in the home magazine indicated that it was a wheelchair. And I thought that is so wonderful that the person who's seated in this chair um, doesn't have a wheelchair with these giant wheels that always scream out, I'm unable to walk without the aid of this chair. And I thought that is so wonderful that they feel like they're sitting in an ordinary chair. And I taped it in my sketchbook. I don't know why. I just thought it was very interesting. And I've actually subsequently done some studies on getting people around that can't walk. And there was this horrible long in the dark ages where they would push somebody in like a wooden what I don't even know what you would call it, but it was like you just throw them in this wooden box and it had wheels and you would push it like you were pushing like a pig in a I'm not describing this very well, but very, very inelegant way of getting someone around that couldn't walk. But I thought this was so wonderful that they didn't feel like they were in a wheelchair. And it took me, honestly, a year later, I was leafing through that same sketchbook and I saw that that person could not move themselves because they needed someone to grab those handles and use those tiny wheels. And it struck me more than anything else that I had not seen that. I had not seen that they were stuck in place and had to ask or beg someone to move them. And so that piece, if you could bring it up again, is
Hmm.
actually about the space of time between my birth mother, who unceremoniously dropped me off somewhere, and my adoptive family. And as I have noticed in my work and other people have pointed out to me, every piece of metal that's a rod has a point on it. I don't ever end my rods just with a cut. I always end up with a point. So that piece has points on the facing the person that's pushing it toward the past, and has points on the front toward the future.
And then, so this kind of leads into, so your furniture design, did you originally start working with steel specifically?
No, and my furniture is so funny. I was working in corporate in DC. And by the way, I don't think you mentioned I now live in LA and have shown in the LA area a little bit. Um, I when I started taking furniture class, which happened to be at an art college, and I always tell people that uh, taking furniture is not a scary thing. People think they can make furniture, where I would never have taken an art class. There's no way I would have thought that I could make art. But I started with furniture, and furniture is very difficult to make, as I came to find out. So you think you can make furniture and you can't make art, when in fact furniture is very difficult. So that's kind of how I got there, and I answered a call for a show, and I felt inclined to make a piece of work, and the I was then TAing in the furniture class, and the instructor of the furniture class was the chair of the sculpture department at the school. And he said, I think you're starting to move toward making art. So with the piece, My Father's Chair, you can see the furniture influence in that I don't put my pieces on pedestals. The quote unquote base is actually an integral part of the piece. But that's where I got all my woodworking experience. But I did start to make furniture a little bit out of metal. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't really know how I ended up with metal. It's just an incredibly heady experience to weld. And I was a girly girl growing up, never wanted to get dirty. And now I love the heat and the sound. And they used to call the sculpture studio at that art college hell. when you go downstairs. It's like, I love it down there. Give me some ear protection. So I don't know how I ended up with metal. I love that I'm able to turn it into something that where you don't walk in and say, oh, look, that's steel.
Mm-hmm.
I do have, Elaine, a little window here. I don't know if there's a good time for me to show that up close.
A little, yeah, you
The
can.
one, the one that the
Oh, yeah.
things that are coming out of inhibit the inhibitors.
Yes, yes, yes.
So if you bring that piece up.
Yes, I can. Um,
And Jeff, you were using the word window when you were talking quite a bit, and I always find that really interesting
Yeah.
that. So this is, I don't know, I can't see myself, so I don't know if you all can see this or not. Can you see
well, I
that?
can click back to you. So this is inhibit the inhibitors, and then Lyndon, go ahead and yes.
So this is the metal window that's made out of 1/8 inch square rod. These are what are coming out of the piece that we just showed. So I started working in multiples, and that's also what is in the center of the gallery is pieces that are somewhat similar that I was creating over and over again. They each have their own distinct personality, I feel. But those pieces that are in the center of the gallery, I do want to say, my mentor describes my work as Tim, help me out here. Confinement, concealment, and collection. So if you were to look with a critical eye toward most of my work, you would see cages of certain, that most things actually are some sort of version of a cage. Somewhat unintentional, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like Jeff, I just kind of start making work. I try not to um,
This
try
is
not to
one.
think too much about where it's going.
I did want to bring up bound again, which we were speaking about, the large piece in the center. So we had a install little like time lapse video of you building it. And a lot of people have come into the gallery and like, oh, does that roll out from the wheel? And then I was like, no, the artist actually has to build it piece by piece.
Mm.
So can you explain like the process of that and also kind of talk about like the material manipulation in making those individual pieces?
I love that they asked that question. I did not know that. Wouldn't that be great? Make my
Yeah.
install a lot easier. It'd be a lot heavier though, and then the wood would get kind of banged up. That's what it's supposed to indicate. The wheels are two different sizes, and when I first was kind of thinking about this, I made two little foam core wheels that were like 4 inches, and I put a toothpick in them, and I made two that were two different sizes. And if as I rolled it around my table, it does make a circle. And so this is kind of a to me, it's a roll away ladder. It was partially inspired. Was and still am fascinated, and I hope everybody notices this now. If you drive by, I don't know if they have these where you in Longmont, but if you drive by a telephone pole, um, they used to have little footholds sticking out of the telephone pole going up so that the line worker could climb that. And I guess people that weren't supposed to climb it were started to climb them. And so now they come out. So there's just holes. And so the line person would carry a little stick and stick it in the hole each time they needed to step up toward the top of the pole. And I was really fascinated by that you can create your own ladder as needed. And so that's kind of the inspiration of this. And whether or not you see it as rolling up or rolling out, and whether or not you see it as a protective circle to keep you safe, or whether you see it as a circle that confines you, is, I think, the juxtaposition of the piece that I really enjoy.
Mhm. Um, and then Jeff, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation too. So I know when the show was proposed to both of you as a group show that you looked at each other's websites and struggled to kind of find the connection because obviously one's 2D, one's 3D, but then kind of the work didn't really seem to connect on first
Oh,
look.
Jeff, did you feel that too? Because I kept calling Elaine and saying, I love his work. I love his website. I love the neurology, but I don't understand why you're putting us together.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had that same impression.
I think one of the things, like, and it's something that occurred to me after talking to you and actually coming in and seeing the work. One of the things that really struck me was that you know these are kind of ways of um, looking at or developing kind of a sense of ourselves, like a sense of self through memory or these sort of cultural kind of ideals that uh, um, and so there was that kind of connection. But then after talking to you, one of the things I really thought about was that this they're also a sense of ourselves or a kind of a model of ourselves, who we are, that is meant to be changeable in a way. Like
Mm,
it's not a static sort of sense of who we are. So I kept, sort of thinking about how do you develop a sense of kind of model of who you are, like what your, you know, um, place in the world is. And then, but then also that these are presented in a way that suggests maybe that's changeable, that we might, you know, alter our sense of ourselves. So,
interesting. I think also the statement that I'm not sure who wrote that for the gallery. I can't remember if it was Diane or not, but it's just the myth part. I think these are all
mhm,
are mine are
mhm,
personal, they're personal mythology. And I don't know, Jeff, that you were there, but you may have been when I was talking about the tall
mhm,
bed and getting to look under the bed and see, as if you're a child, there's monsters under the bed. Is it a place of safety or a place of fear?
mhm.
That it also is and somewhat inspired by a fairy tale. And so I think
Right.
that you and I have a little bit of that in common as well, like taking
Yeah.
something that's outside of ourselves and applying sort of a personal layer to it and going and kind of going back and forth between the personal layer and the mythological layer.
Right.
Yeah, no, I have to say, and I think I've said this to almost everybody. I think it's an amazing show. I'm really happy to be showing with Jeff. I
Hmm.
think it was something I would not have seen coming. But I was really impressed by it, by our pairing. And Jeff, I don't think you know this, but I would love to try to do I don't know if you ever do collaborations. I don't, and I don't often ask people to, but if you would be interested in doing that,
Yeah, of
it would be
course.
okay.
I love it. Yeah. Every once in a while, but not often. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
That's,
often
yeah.
ask people to, so there you go. Oh, and I also wanted to say we both have great hair.
We all have great hair.
We all have great hair.
It's true.
Um, Another similarity between the two of you is that both of you created nonprofit organizations that deal with creativity and art. And I wanted to give both of you a chance to share more about your organizations and kind of just leave it up to you guys to like whoever wants to go first.
Yeah.
I can go. I wanted to say,
Yeah.
Jeff, your friend put up, I believe, your website.
Hmm.
And I wanted to say, my website is just my name. I think it's actually under my name right there now that I see it. It is there, lyndencline.com. But I started two organizations. One was sort of an offshoot of my teaching, and it's creativitygrowsontrees.com. So like money grows on trees, which obviously it doesn't. So the subtitle being, but trees need strong roots. And it is an organization. I teach through there. It also has a blog trying to um, sort of give people more tools in order to stay connected to their creativity. So, like, establishing good work habits, process versus product, things like that. But the one that I'm speaking about at the gallery, a week from Tuesday, is Artists as Activists. And this was something I was interested in when I was on Jeff's page as well. And it's plural, artistsasactivists.com. And it is an organization that distributes activist art on a regular basis in the hope that people will be interested in picking an issue and changing the world. Instead of me picking one issue and putting all my extra money and work toward it, which was cheetahs, oddly, for a while. I also work with animals. This gives people, hopefully starts conversations and sort of get some energy toward whatever issue somebody can find themselves having some sort of personal impetus to get involved in. And that's, there's a lot of important social issues that are being ignored right now, and there's a lot of great art being made about them. And I thought it was a really wonderful way to hopefully incite people. And the slogan for that is with our eyes open, we can change the world.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's see. So yeah, so I have along with my friend Bill who is hanging out here with us. We started an art and neuroscience outreach group, Northwest Noggin. Gosh, we started this. I think it's been about 13 years ago now. And we actually just we our kids went to school together, and we started it on the we were hanging out in the playground one summer, and we talked about doing this, collaborating and kind of putting together some classes to do this. And I don't know that we ever really expected it to go as far as it's gone, but now we actually teach art and neuroscience classes together at Portland State University. But I've been, we've done presentations for Congress with this. We've done, we even went to the White House way back when
Gosh.
Obama was in office. Um, and when there was a Office of Science and Technology, um, and we in fact when I get done here, we're gonna Bill's gonna meet me up in the UK. We're gonna head up to a science festival in Sidmouth in England here and join a couple of our colleagues from King's College and do a whole presentation on knowing through making. I've been able to do all of this stuff through that. But also, I have a real interest in kind of the overlap between neuroscience and art and the power of art to sort of to in not just as a way to kind of learn, which we use it as a lot through the things that we do, but also a way to kind of entrain flexibility in us, and a way to kind of really um, uh, uh, see each other kind of so the more we use that the more we allow people to sort of express themselves through things that they make, the better kind of our ability is to sort of accommodate new ideas and change with the world around us. So
Hmm. Um, yeah, I kind of did a deep dive on some of your writings, and I think it's really fascinating, and I really feel like it definitely ties with the art that's in this show. So the whole show
mhm,
is myth and memory. And one of the things that I
mhm,
read that you had said before, and I probably not in exact words, but memories need a narrative to exist for us
Hmm.
long term. And I think that that
Yeah.
is a really great like way to look at the works, both of your works that are in this show. Um, and then also just the way your work kind of deals with neuroscience and art and how science and art are usually seen as oppositional, but then totally they're not. Like
Yeah.
a lot of art has to do with expressing those memories or storytelling,
Hmm.
and that really deals with kind of the whole neuroscience of trying to put a framework on, what you've experienced. So, very, very interesting. And I wanted to give you guys a chance because I know Lyndon is actually sitting in front of something. We see both of your work in the show, and your sculptural work is represented, and Jeff, your painting is represented. But do you guys dabble, work, or experiment in different mediums and want to share?
I have an alter ego. Um, and it's my name, my initials, I'm sorry, phonetically. So I actually started shooting photos during COVID. And as much as I was terrified of color in my sculpture, I found color to be sort of freeing in photo. And, I can shoot, I don't know, 100 photos in, 10 in a minute, whereas I can make one sculpture in, a few months. So it's been kind of freeing, and also with the editing process and the culling process. But I don't know if you can see it. And this would not ordinarily be something I would show you, except that I happen to be sitting in my husband's home office, and he has this hanging on his wall. And I became fascinated with a Ferris wheel in my community. It's the biggest Ferris wheel that comes apart and travels. And so I started following it around the East Coast and shooting pictures of it. And at a carnival, you can actually do much more dangerous things than you can in an amusement park. So I would creep underneath it and get under it. And so anyway, yeah, it's been really fun. So LC, let's say what ELLECEEART.com. And it's she started shooting these crazy photos, and they've gotten a lot of acclaim actually. And whereas I don't sell my sculpture because I don't make very much, and it's very near and dear to me, and it's my own personal narrative. And I do nonprofit shows and museum shows, and that's really about it. This I've been able to, just ship off to a gallery. I don't have to go with it, and then maybe it'll sell. So it's gotten a lot of acclaim. So this is one of my Ferris wheel pieces.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, no, I actually do a bit of sculpture here and there. And I one of the interesting things. So I do a lot of these residencies. I probably do one a year or so, or somewhere around there. And usually when I do these residencies, I try to do something that I wouldn't normally do, just to kind of push myself. And one of the nice things about that is that it doesn't have necessarily have to work out. I mean, it could be something that doesn't really go anywhere. But I always try and make something that I just haven't done. So I've been working on some video pieces here, and we'll see. I mean, it may work out, it may not, but it's a really interesting experience to me because it really kind of, you know, uh, forces me to work in a different way than I normally would, which is always, uh, um, very freeing in a way, usually. So,
Cool. And
Where
then
are
Lyndon,
you? I don't think, Elaine, did you talk about where Jeff is right now?
oh.
Did I?
no. So where are both of you guys? And because we usually do these artist talks in person, but
Yeah.
obviously we couldn't because we're all over the place.
Yes. So I'm doing a artist residency in the UK, out in this great town, Penryn, which is in Cornwall, so south of England. And I'm out here for the month, just sort of exploring, soaking in the sort of the stories and the culture around here, and a lot of the work that I'm doing is sort of based around that. And I have a show opening up here well, tomorrow, so that will be all the work that I've done here that goes into that. Um, yeah, so yeah, it's like 10 o'clock or what, I don't know, almost 11 o'clock now for me. So
And
that's why
then
it's
where are
dark
you
out
headed?
here.
Yeah, I know. The window behind you, I was like,
Yeah,
is that the light?
it's
Well, where are you headed to after this?
so like I said, more immediately I'm going to Sidmouth, but when I'm done with that, I'm coming back home for like 3 days, and then I'm actually teaching a class in Valparaiso, Chile. I'm going to fly out to Chile, and I'll be there till the end of July. So moving around.
Very cool. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about the things that you've done in your past and also what you're really looking forward to. So what do you consider to be your favorite accomplishment? This doesn't have to be like your biggest, just your one that is your favorite. And what projects are you looking forward to most?
Well, I didn't tell you that maybe I did already, but I'm in Los Angeles in the desert north of Los Angeles. And I just yesterday decided to get involved with a museum here in Torrance, which is south of Los Angeles toward San Diego, and it's a community show. And so I'm anxious and I'm excited to do that. Not anxious, I'm excited to do that. Just to get more involved in the community here in LA. I was very, very involved in the
Mhm.
art community in Washington. I was president of the Washington Sculptors Group for a while. So I haven't yet kind of immersed myself. My art is not really what Los Angeles likes. It's a little, I think it's a little too narrative. So it's going to be interesting, but I'm anxious to see it. It's been well received here so far. So I'm looking forward to that. And also I'm thinking actually of a friend here who shows all over the world. And I'm unable to do that with the work that I have right now because I don't ship it. I go with it, I drive it myself. So I guess if somebody wanted to pay for shipment on on a cruise ship, I would probably do it, but nobody was offered that. So I'm actually thinking of making the little, do you have a picture of Secrets?
Yes.
The little metal purse. I'm actually considering making that in editions. And it is a piece that was inspired by Sunday school purses that I used to carry. And the mythology behind that is that, I was dressed up as sort of a little doll. Um, there's what I consider air holes in the front of it. So it's really about some of the reality versus the appearances of my childhood. But I am trying to consider if it's something that I can then do as additions and maybe, not have to travel with it. And I'm also
Yeah.
working right now on making that same metal, the 1/8 inch steel plate. I'm making book pages to hang on the wall and actually printing, I call them patina paintings, but screen printing patina onto the front of those book pages, and creating something that's a little more two-dimensional, which I'm really excited about because it's very like Jeff was saying, it's something that's out of the zone of what I've been doing so
Mhm.
far, but something that can be a little more immediate. It does not escape me that it can also travel in a way that these don't. So, and I also really love doing things that are a series. So having, say, 3 book pages hanging on the wall, with different, images on them.
Very
Yeah.
cool. I'm glad that the printing is going well because I know that we were talking about that before.
Yes, it's really
Yeah.
Yeah.
actually I had it's not true that I have not met my biological father. I met him in between the opening of the show and today.
Mhm.
And so I've been making two-dimensional work in a rather immediate way about that situation. making screen printing. And though I don't have to dedicate quite as much time and effort and energy. And
Mhm.
maybe get my stop kicking myself for having something not be perfect. So that's one of my goals in my life is to be able to
Yeah.
make art and not have the first thing and everything I make be perfect. Because all you waste is paper and a little bit of time and a little bit of ink. And so I keep saying to myself, it's only paper, it's only ink. It's okay if it's not perfect, which is something is very difficult for me, but that's one of the things I'm hoping to expand on a little bit.
Fantastic.
I was telling Jeff that when I talk about people that paint, and this is, of course, kind of insulting to painters, but if he wanted to paint a bird flying, he would just paint a bird flying. And I have to either put a stick up its
Mhm.
ass or hang it from the ceiling or attach it to the wall. So it's a lot different experience in terms of the
Yeah.
immediacy of it.
Mhm.
It's always interesting to me how the process of something changes what the outcome is going to be.
Absolutely.
I think people might find it surprising just how imprecise I am about what I do. Because when you look at it, it seems like maybe it's got all this detail and there's it's pretty, but I'm really loose about how these things are actually made. So,
We don't believe
you
you.
know, yeah, they're kind of
I actually had questions specifically about one where it was like, the hand is small. What did he mean by that? Did he mean to? I was like, what is that? And then this, I was like, is there a meaning to that? So
yeah.
there are
Yes.
all sorts of questions about each painting where I'm like, what does that mean? So
Yes.
And some of it looks
Um,
like you painted with an individual paintbrush bristle.
tiny.
yeah, no, I kind of go back and forth
Yeah.
with things just, but it is actually, I mean, I'm just, it's it's part of what I like about the painting is that it really does allow me to be, you can get away with a lot just being imprecise and kind of pushing things around until it sort of feels like it looks right. And then,
How do you know when they're finished? Because I have a friend that's a painter and he showed me a studio
yeah,
of all these small paintings and he said, take any one you want. And I picked
yeah.
out three or four and he kept saying, that's not finished yet. That one's not
It's not
finished
done.
yet. No, I don't like that one.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the great things about deadlines is that it
Yes.
sort
Yes.
of
You and I
forces
both.
kind of, because you really could, I would never say I'm totally satisfied with any of the
Mhm.
things but at a certain point you gotta move on.
The
So,
finish on the metal house with the windows coming out was actually, I was crying sitting on the floor of my studio, there was a scratch on the metal, trying to cover up that scratch. And I
yeah,
patinaed it and I didn't like it. And then I burned it and then I patinaed it and then I put wood
yeah,
stain on it and then I ground it out and then I did it again. And it was
yeah.
because it was due the next day, of course.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I ended up with having that really organic looking metal was purely by deadline and mistake. And I'm very
Yeah,
happy with that, with the way it turned out ultimately. But at the time, it was just deadline driven.
it
Mhm.
is. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, I'll sit and you can obsess over some tiny thing that, no one but you would ever notice. And, but it'll never look right to you. So you just sit
Yeah.
there and but it is like I I don't really necessarily decide something's finished. I there's a point where it has to go somewhere. Otherwise, I would keep working on it.
Do
I
they
can
have
get
a do they have a glaze over them that would indicate that you want it to be finished then?
they do, and then I'll paint over that too.
Yeah, I'm
So,
paint over the glaze.
So Jeff, did you have a favorite accomplishment? We're just gonna end
oh
on this,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
we'll go to questions
Okay.
after this from the audience.
Yeah, I actually, it's always hard to say. I've done some interesting things. I did a great residency in Shanghai in China. I was there for 3 months through the Swatch watch company,
Oh,
which was
cool.
fantastic. But I actually think, one of the things that I really enjoy is the work I've done through Northwest Noggin, and in part because I just jumped into something I had no idea, what I was doing or how to do it, and but you really kind of learn that, um, you know, I don't necessarily need to have someone vet me to do something to go into a classroom to go into my own community or something. I can just do it. And so that really is kind of one of the things that I've been most happy with, and I have a lot of I don't know. I have a lot of stuff coming up. So what I'm looking forward to, I think I've talked about a little bit of this, but I do actually, I have a show opening up in Portland as well when I get back in August. And that I'm doing with a friend of mine, Kendra Crick, who is also an artist and a scientist as well, and she does a lot of work around memory and sleep. So her work is all going to be about that sort of, and there's kind of a connection in this sort of dreamlike quality of what we both
Hmm.
are working on in that. So I am looking forward to that a lot, but also, like I said, I'm going to Sidmouth and going to Chile. I'm going to wrap the year up. I have another residency at the end of this year in New Mexico and Taoiseach with the Paseo project, which is going to be a nice way to sort of, you know, wrap up everything this year. So, but yeah.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I tell my wife is like, you're going to be gone for like a third of this year. So it's not really wasn't my intention, but I'm out and about for quite a bit.
Very cool. Well, I do want to open up to questions. Lyndon, it was for you. It was for the choice of working in steel. And I think the question was, because we kind of had spoken about it before, the question was, your work is based on your personal experience and your past experience, and you kind of spoken about how, you know, you kind of had an interesting upbringing. Do you feel like you gravitated towards metalwork because of its strength and malleability, or is there any kind of connection to, your past experiences and the actual selection of the working with metal?
Well, this is a joke, but maybe it's a little too revealing. They can be used as weapons. I did work my first art class after I did the furniture. I have a certificate in sculpture and ceramics, so I was forced to take ceramics. My first class actually was in ceramics, and I realized how much I really didn't like working with clay. One thing I hate about it is it just sucks all the moisture out of your skin.
Yeah.
And it made me crazy. That feeling, I'm getting it right now just talking about it. And for a little while, I actually have painted. I have a series of paintings. Um, and those are very personal, and they tell my personal story in a more graphic way, in a way that I don't feel like sharing. The metal work that I do is a little more obscured, the messages and the thoughts and the stories behind them. So I am able to work a little bit more realistically and figuratively. Tim and I have an art collection when I noticed that we collect things that are figurative. A lot of like folklore based art is the stuff that we collect, the stuff that I gravitate toward, but it's not the stuff that I make. That doesn't really answer your question. My first experience with metal was before I took the furniture class. I took jewelry and I made jewelry, and I realized, and people ask me oftentimes, I have this ring with a bird skull on it. And people say, "Oh, did you make that?" And I always say it would take me as long to make this as it would take to make a sculpture. So that's not how I choose to spend my time. But it was really interesting to be able to manipulate something like that and to feel like I'm manipulating something now that is what they build buildings and bridges with is really there's something I have a huge collection of rod in my studio. Um, I also found that after working in furniture, that the cost of metal is really inexpensive compared to wood. So that it was actually really interesting to me to see the difference between that. And when I was a kid, I sewed. So I have worked in a lot of different materials. I will say that I worked in glass for a short time, and when you fire things, they break. And I found that just to be the most disappointing thing in the world was to have something happen that you could not possibly expect, or maybe I could
Mm.
and I just didn't learn how to manipulate it properly. But I have actually made a piece out of 1/8 inch steel rod, and I was outside spray coating it to keep it from rusting. And it was a tall, skinny tree, and a truck came and ran it over in my driveway in my studio, and it survived. It became a flat tree instead of a three-dimensional tree, but the welds didn't break. And I was so proud of myself because metal, if my welds break, it's because I suck as a welder and you can re-weld it. So there's something very magical about steel. And I have found that um, I am able to manipulate it cold to make really gentle curves in it cold. Requires a lot of physical strength, but as I'm doing something that requires that physical strength, then sometimes I get sore doing it. I come home and my abs hurt from bending metal. Um, it makes me feel I feel very proud. There's something very satisfying in being able to manipulate something that's difficult to manipulate. And I've learned through the years when people say, "Oh, you're an artist, what do you do?" And I used to say sculptor. And I finally asked, "What do you think I make when I say that?" And they said figurative ceramics. So now I say metal sculptor. And I know they also don't have any idea what I do, but all which is to say, I love manipulating something that's difficult to manipulate and that's dirty and that's very industrial. There's something really magical about it.
Very
It's very
cool.
satisfying. And like the first
Mhm.
thing I'll do if someone comes to my studio is I will put a piece of rod in the vise and give them a torch and have them forge it and bend it with and gloves and natural fibers so you don't light your clothes on fire. And it's just very they you can just see in their face wonderful that is to be able to do that,
Hmm.
that you
That's
can
cool.
do it.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I have a question from Robin, and this one is for Jeff. She says, I love both your work and how this show came together. I'd love to hear from Jeff any comments about your choices in color palettes and traditional painting style. I can see how it nicely supports the themes of your work. Have you always painted
Mm.
this way? Is it meant to be a nod to artists like Bruegel who influence you or something else? I
Like
think that's
who
a
did
Well,
she say?
oh,
I have no
Bruegel.
Bruegel, yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
no,
Bruegel.
and I'm definitely very interested in Bruegel and Bosch and all of those guys. But what the thing about the color palette is it is one in general. My color palette is 90% of these things. It's pretty limited in that I'll use maybe 4 colors for the whole thing, and then there'll be just a couple of bits and pieces that you'll use something really saturated in that for. But the other thing that I'll kind of often do with these is I look through a lot of other artwork and including those Flemish painters like Bruegel and Bosch, but
Gosh.
also Impressionists. Also, I'll borrow stuff from you know these sort of 1960s ads and things like that. And so those color palettes, even within any given piece, they might alternate from the kind of palettes that you would see in a maybe an impressionist piece or some romantic era kind of painting or one of those Northern Renaissance pieces or the kind of weird lime green and pink from some 1960s illustration or something like
What
that.
about the
So
piece behind you? That's a very limited palette.
yeah, no, and it actually they um, it sort of references these kind of Victorian uh, era kind of paintings and stuff, and part of that too. The other thing with these and with most of the pieces in there is that I'm always really influenced by the place I'm at when I'm making these things, and so what you notice with a lot of the pieces in the show at the firehouse that um, that palette sort of reflects that like I did a lot of those pieces or at least started them or conceived of them in the high desert or the Great Basin or these really sort of sparse kind of landscapes and so that also kind of is something that you know um, I work with when I'm making these things. This is that's the weather here,
Oh,
it's kind of so
Um, I
um oh yeah, go ahead.
I did have a question actually. So I wanted to put up a couple of. So when people come in to see the work and seeing the work together, this one is apotheosis, and so I wanted to kind
Hmm.
of reference this one first, and then also I wanted to talk about um, the chair and. So when I was talking
I love
about
when Jeff hung these, he said they don't have to necessarily be, they don't have to be straight
Yeah.
because of the, I loved that when we were hanging the show.
It
so
is the advantage of that. So-
So when viewing them together, so somebody was saying when they came into the gallery, like they're their own little worlds, but then there's like something off or something dangerous about them.
Mhm.
So I wanted to specifically point to this one, Lyndon. So you were saying something about spikes coming one way and spikes coming another way.
Mm,
And then Jeff, in some of your paintings, there's always like this sense of, I guess, foreboding or
Mhm.
something around the corner. Was that in Am I just reading into it, or
No.
were you just kind of?
You,
Because I
you
feel
know,
like,
I think in part for me at least, like a lot of the sort of characters that I'm creating in here, they are in these situations that there is some inherent kind of danger or something to them, but they are often oblivious to it. So
mm.
they're kind of, you know, uh, unaware in some way of what's happening around them. I always say too, I don't know that I ever intend to make these things as apocalyptic as they end up. So they just turn out that way. So
yeah. And then Lyndon, you were saying like nothing that you create has like it's always got a pokey end to it, and so like this one's bound, and once again like it's got that danger to it. And what does that mean to you? Or why do you do it that way? I guess.
Why do I do it that way? I try to get out of my own way. I know artists talk about that a lot. I can't tell you exactly. I can tell you my observations after I'm done with them. One thing I did want to say about the wheelchair piece is that when I designed it, the points are meant not to, poke someone's eye out, but they were meant to be over my head, and then over the average person's head. But it ended up that my actual head is the height, my neck is the height of the seat of the chair. So that was something I observed later, that my head would actually fit on the empty chair. Um, I can't really answer that question for you. I just sort of, I usually, when I'm starting, I just kind of get a piece of metal and kind of light up the torch and, kind of make one thing. So, that piece bound, the pieces that make up the ladder, the pieces that have the hooks on the end, I refer to them as bones. But I also think of them as the cross between flora and fauna. And they were influenced in part by, oh, Tim, help me out here. I can never think of his name. The botanical photographer, the German Blossfeld, Karl
Mhm.
Blossfeld. Those are the pieces that make up the ladder, and then the straight pieces go through those ends. Um, I've not answered your question at all.
That's okay.
What do
Sometimes
you think?
that's just the way art is, right? Well, cool. Does
But
anyone
somebody
else?
did mention to me that in the Vietnam War, and I can't remember what they're called, something sticks, but the Vietnamese people would dig a hole with the hope that the soldiers would fall in, and in the hole were bamboo sticks sticking straight out, and they put feces on it, human feces on it, so that the sticks would break your skin as you fell into the hole, and then the feces would cause a bacterial infection. So if people do walk in and they have these different reads on things, and that I find that interesting. I had not known that before, but there's definitely something to be said for the points.
Mhm. Well,
And when
cool.
Jeff was talking about a color palette, I thought it was kind of funny because I was thinking, oh yes, I have one, black.
Is that your personal color palette too? Because I feel like,
Yes, yes. I am
yeah.
very afraid of color. I think that if I was to, there was when I was designing furniture, a book was recommended to me. I think it's called Designing Furniture. And I read the whole thing. It was amazing. It was very inspiring. But the one thing I quote from it often is, in your head, paint the piece of furniture gray and look at the form. Before you put all the embellishments on it, look and see
Mhm.
if the form is balanced. And that has never left me. And that was way before I started making art. But yes, there's something to just the spare dark. The wood
Mhm.
is always stained. I came up with a stain recipe. You can see the grain in it, but it's meant to be black. And it's funny, the wheelchair piece, I was telling Diane, she's not on here anymore, but we were talking about shadows, and it does make a shadow on the wall that's very interesting. And I did toy with the idea of having the shadow be the piece, and paint the piece white so the piece disappears against the wall.
Oh,
And boy, was it
interesting.
awful. It looked like lawn furniture from hell. And of course I was on a deadline, and I immediately had to paint it black. And so when I refinished it for this show, I was sanding off something, and I went, why is there all this paint layer on here? And I was like, oh, that's the white underneath. So that's why Diane and I were sort of toying with the idea of, and I told Elaine
Mhm.
that lighting my work is difficult because you don't want the shadow on the wall to compete with the piece itself. And when I do solo shows, I paint the walls blood red so that the shadow is a dark version of that. And it doesn't compete with the piece quite as much.
That's very cool.
That's why this blue
Um,
piece behind me is like scares me. It's so colorful. One of the things that I consider, if my work is successful, is that you see something from a distance
Yeah.
and you see something else as you come up on it, but that hopefully the thing
Yeah.
you see from a distance draws you in to see the
Right.
thing you see when you're closer.
Well, I also see, yeah, I mean, I also I like that shifting in scale in your work too, because
Yeah.
you definitely have that where you're kind of uh, um, uh, uh, putting those or juxtaposing like things that are kind of out of proportion,
Yeah.
or the scale is shifting um, between big things and small things. I've always enjoyed that kind of. Um, sort of hierarchical scale that you used to see in those kind of early Renaissance or medieval paintings and stuff. I always thought that was really interesting. Like you things are scaled based on their importance or something, and
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with what's big. So I thought that was this kind of a nice representation of
And the surreal aspect of that
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Well, we do have a few minutes. Did you guys want to pick one piece to kind of just talk about specifically, and then we can end it and let people go on their merry way for Sundays?
Sure.
So I think I have all the pieces ready to share. So Jeff, did
Yeah.
you want to go first? And then we can
Let
end the
me,
one.
yeah. Let me, gosh,
I'm ready if you need some more time, Jeff.
I know. You go ahead. I'll
Okay.
let me think about what piece I'm gonna look at.
Lyndon,
So,
which one?
So the tall bed.
Tall bed. Okay, hold on a second. Let
So
me
this
find
piece,
it.
I did a solo show a couple of years ago and in Pennsylvania. And for some reason, well, not for some, I'm very fascinated by kind of the lore that we are told as children. And I actually had gone back and gotten Grimm's fairy tales, the exact edition that I had as a child. But I also am very interested in fairy tales and the way that Disney tells them, and Disney just,
hmm.
Disneyfies them. But for some reason, that piece, just I started to think about Rapunzel because the working title, and don't call it this, it's untitled, but is Tall Bed with Hairs. And I was really
Oh,
trying to
hold
explore when I made it, and I was not thinking about the fairy tale, was getting under the bed. And I have another piece that has a series of tall beds as well. That what is it like when you're hiding under the bed? What is it like, when you think the monsters are under the bed? But I really thought it before I did this solo show and was picking a piece to talk about. For some reason, had recently been reminded of Rapunzel. And the original fairy tale of Rapunzel is nothing like the one that we sort of know now, and we've turned everything into a one-liner anyway. But Rapunzel was pregnant, and they lived next door to this witch, and the only thing that would keep the pregnant woman from miscarrying was to eat this particular green vegetable. It was like a lettuce green, and it grew in the witch's property. And so the husband was going over there and stealing it, and the witch caught him, and she said, I will only he said, I need this or she will lose the baby. And she said, well, I will only let you have this if you give me the baby when the baby's born. And they made that deal. And that's how the girl ended up in the tower. And so it just really struck me on the difference in the way that we think of the story. Also, the prince, when he was, I don't even know if it was a prince in the fairy tale, was climbing her hair. The witch actually put her up in the tower and starved her, and hated her because she was beautiful. And the prince climbed the hair, and the witch cut the hair off, and the prince fell on the thorny bush and died. So it just really struck me the whole lore of the infant, which is where a lot of my work comes from, is my biological mother, and the time in
Hmm.
between, and the family I ended up with, which was not a great situation either. But it has these long, skinny things that come down, and sometimes I've been able to actually put that piece on an uneven ground in a gallery where you walk by and they swing a little bit, which really appeals to me. But none of these
So
things am I aware of as I'm actually making it. It just kind of happens, and I just kind of make something and try to not keep throwing things at it and try to not be very critical. So it's interesting to me that I look at it and see something I didn't see before.
yeah. I like that too. Just finding something new in your own work too. Um, let's see. Let's look at uh my triptych that I have in there.
Oh, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about
Yeah.
this.
So one of the interesting things is that kind of one of the original sort of starting points, or one of the things I was looking at when I started making this was actually Jan van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece, and which had this kind of sort of lamb in the middle that was and the lamb in that case it was headed to the sacrifice. So, but I had started actually uh, kind of with that sort of central idea, but then I kind of was thinking about these sort of symbols of change and progress, and so I started working with this astronaut here, and uh, so that was kind of the next part that I approached in that, and he's kind of displaced in this sort of Martian-y kind of landscape, which but he's still attached to, you know, uh, by this hose to this really sort of desolate landscape, and this kind of um, 1960s guy kind of pouring gas into his suit. So I think I kind of wanted to take that sort of then I like Bruegel, and uh, uh, and like Bosch was a humanist, and as part of one of the interests I have in that work, and uh, they he was so that starting point for me really suggested that, kind of placing these kind of um, human values, but also that in the center of this, but that also kind of in a way where they're, interacting but unaware of each other. So um, I also the other interesting thing about this one to me too is that, and I don't normally do this, but this was actually I had this was a single panel originally, and it was a
Oh.
big piece I was working on, and it was a landscape of Wyoming. And at a certain point, I was just kind of at a dead end with it, so I ended up cutting the whole thing up. So uh, there was this landscape that I kind of underlies the whole thing, and it it did in a way it was kind of mashing that altarpiece, which is kind of an altarpiece to like these um, symbols of the future, but they're really kind of destructive in a way. Um, but that landscape just sort of infused the whole thing too, which is part of where the whole Mars thing actually came from. Like if you've driven through Wyoming, there's a fair stretch of it that is like that.
Mars.
Yeah. So
Kansas too. Well, cool. Well, I feel like we could spend hours talking about these pieces. But I do want to honor our time and say thank you so much to you, Lyndon and Jeff, for sharing your work and for sharing your process and kind of how you get what is in your very interesting brains onto the walls and into your sculptures. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you to everyone who joined us on this artist talk.